Straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily. Brian Laundrie's personal items found in a Florida reserve, and a medical examiner on the scene. The latest in the search for Brian Laundrie. And
I have to live with this every day, and it brings me nightmares, and I can't live with myself sometimes.
confessed Parkland school shooter Nikolas Cruz pleads guilty to all charges. Plus, a settlement reached in the death of Elijah McClain. What we know right now about the federal civil rights lawsuit. And later, the trial in Ahmaud Arbery's death.
To help the lawyers determine whether or not you can be a fair, unbiased, impartial juror that is honestly seeking the truth in this case.
We bring you to day 3 of jury selection. Law&Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer along with Terry Austin. We're following 2 big stories out of Florida as confessed Parkland school shooter Nikolas Cruz pleads guilty on all charges. But first, new information into the Law&Crime Network newsroom as Brian Laundrie's family lawyer says items belonging to him have been found near Florida Reserve. This as the medical examiner is called to the scene. Law&Crime's Anjanette Levy is here with the latest on the case. Anjanette?
Brian, the FBI says what appears to be human remains was found in an area that law enforcement had been searching, and those apparent human remains were actually found near a notebook and a backpack that belonged to Brian Laundrie. And Laundrie's parents, Chris and Roberta, had actually been out searching that area on Wednesday morning. Now, Laundrie has been named a person of interest in the death of his fiancée, Gabby Petito. Her remains were found in Wyoming on September 19th in the Bridger-Teton National Forest. The coroner said that she was strangled to death. Now, the Laundrie's attorney, Steve Bertolino, tells me Chris and Roberta Laundrie went to the Myakkahatchee Creek Environmental Park this morning to search for Brian. The FBI and Northport Police Department were informed last night of Brian's parents' intentions, and they met Chris and Roberta there this morning. After a brief search off a trail that Brian frequented, some articles belonging to Brian were found. As of now, law enforcement is conducting a more thorough investigation of that area. And as I told you, the FBI says apparent human remains were found there. Now, Brian Laundrie's parents told police that they last saw him on September 13th. That was 2 days after Gabby Petito was reported missing. Laundrie was charged, you'll recall, with using a debit card that belonged to Gabby Petito after she died without her permission. To date, that's really the only criminal charge that he faces. He and Gabby Petito, you will recall, were seen on body camera footage during a traffic stop on August 12th in Moab, Utah. What initiated that traffic stop was a man calling 911 and saying that he saw a man hitting a woman. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Joining us today is Terry Austin, our co-host. Terry, according to the FBI, the area where the items belonging to Laundrie and these supposed human remains was underwater until now. How will that complicate identifying the remains?
I think it's going to be very difficult. The water is obviously going to be, helping as far as the decomposition of the body is concerned. So we're not going to have a body that has more clues on it in terms of how the passing occurred. But right now, Brian, they don't even know whose remains these are. They're going to have to do a DNA test on it. They're going to have to determine whether or not this really is Brian Laundrie. They did find his backpack and a notebook, and apparently all of this was near the car that belonged to the Laundries. But at this point, we don't know whose remains these are. They will be identified, and we do know, as we heard from Anjanette, that the Sarasota medical examiner was there. So we should find out soon enough who this is.
Yeah, more questions and hopefully answers soon to come. Anjanette, has the Petito family said anything about this latest update in the search for Brian Laundrie?
They've been very vocal, very measured in their comments, but they have not commented since this news broke about these apparent human remains being found in that area. They wanted to and were hoping to find Brian Laundrie alive. They had said in an interview broadcast earlier this week that they wanted answers from him. So they may not get those answers now should those remains be positively identified as Brian Laundrie's.
All right, thank you both. We'll continue our updates in this case as more and more information comes up. Thank you again. On to Capitol Hill news now, where heiress and reality star Paris Hilton turns youth advocate, calling for accountability in congregate care. Hilton's appearance in D.C. marked the formal entrance of the Congregate Accountability Care Act into Congress. The 40-year-old spoke as a survivor of abuse against the troubled teen industry. As we've reported, Hilton says she endured abuse as a teenager while she was in the care of Provio Cannon School in Utah. Hilton claims that this abuse is not uncommon and caused her years of PTSD and trauma. The bill is aimed at creating a federal basic bill of rights for youths as they enter the congregate care. This would include guaranteeing contact with parents and guardians, education, and access to the outdoors. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, confessed Parkland school shooter pleads guilty on all counts.
Life means you are in there for the term of your life and you do not come out until you are no longer alive. Do you understand?
Nikolas Cruz will officially spend the rest of his life behind bars, and the death penalty is still on the table. Just ahead on Law and Crime Daily's Anjanette Levy explains what's next for the school shooter. It was the video that shocked the nation. An unarmed black jogger, 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery, gunned down in broad daylight. The three men charged will now stand trial. For live gavel-to-gavel coverage of the trial, subscribe to Law and Crime on YouTubeTV today. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. Nikolas Cruz pleads guilty to killing 17 people in a shooting at a high school in Parkland, Florida, back in 2018. This comes as the families of the victims settle a lawsuit with the school district for $25 million. Law and Crime's Anjanette Levy is here with the change in the plea and what one of the victims' father says about it. Anjanette?
Brian, this plea means that this case will now go straight to a jury that will decide whether or not Nikolas Cruz gets life in prison or the death penalty. Cruz, when changing his plea today actually addressed the victims.
I am doing this for you, and I do not care if you do not believe me. And I love you, and I know you don't believe me.
Nikolas Cruz explaining his decision to plead guilty to the families of the 17 people he murdered at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. It was Valentine's Day 2018 when he killed 14 students and 3 staff members.
I am very sorry for what I did, and I have to live with it every day. And that if I were to get a second chance, I will do everything in my power to try to help others.
Cruz's words may have been little consolation to the families left to live with grief and loss every day. They sat in the gallery, forced to relive that day.
How do you wish to plead?
Guilty.
One by one, Judge Elizabeth Shearer went through the charges, the prosecutor outlining the facts of the case in excruciating detail.
The defendant brought with him to Marjory Stoneman Douglas 11 firearm magazines. A student walked into the east stairwell, and the defendant said to him, "You better get out of here. Something bad is about to happen."
Cruz had previously attended the school he attacked. He said he hates drugs and believes the country would be better off if people stopped smoking marijuana.
I believe it's your decision to decide where I go, whether I live or die, not the jury's.
Jamie Gutenberg was one of the students killed that day. She was 14 and loved to dance. Her father, Fred, tweeted, "Today the murderer will plead guilty. The news will be about that. We will focus on Jamie's life."
Fred Gutenberg said that he is hosting a fundraiser this weekend to honor Jamie's life. It's a virtual dance-a-thon, and the money raised there will go to a foundation that he and his wife opened to support causes that were important to Jamie. The trial on the penalty phase, meanwhile, will start on January 4th of next year. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Joining us today is civil rights attorney Jeffrey Storms and Terry Austin to discuss the guilty plea in the Parkland shooting. Jeffrey, no trial, straight to the penalty phase. Does admitting guilt and foregoing a trial help Cruz's chances to avoid the death penalty?
On some level, theoretically, but I don't know how much. This strikes me as one of the conversations that you have with your client where you basically say, give me something to work with. And that small something to work with here is him showing some acceptance of fault and accepting some responsibility. However, I think it's unlikely that it's going to provide him much help in the penalty phase of this, though it does give his lawyers at least something to argue.
Absolutely. Let's get right to that, Terry. What did you think of Cruz's apologies to the families, victims? In your eyes, was it genuine?
Listen, he pled guilty, but I do not think that apology was genuine. He failed to take full responsibility for his actions. He talked about drugs and television. That had nothing to do with his ruthless actions. He said that he has trouble sleeping at night. Well, how difficult must it be for these families to sleep at night? And he also said that he wanted the victims and their families to be the ones to determine his fate. The judge made it very clear that it would be the jury who is going to decide his fate. And the prosecution, when they recounted all of the actions, it was so evident to me that he is a cold-blooded executioner. He went back and shot several of the individuals more than once. So if there's ever a death penalty case, this is the one.
Tend to agree there with that. And Jeanette, did the judge also sentence Cruz on the case where he is accused of assaulting a corrections officer?
He did, Brian, or she did rather, Brian. Judge Shearer did. You might recall that last Friday, Nikolas Cruz, or last week, Nikolas Cruz pleaded guilty in that battery case. Well, today she sentenced him to 26 years in prison for that. That corrections officer that he had assaulted, he did not want to appear in court, but said through a representative of the prosecutor's office that he wanted Cruz to get the maximum sentence. So he'll be serving 26 years on that case.
So a maximum on the assault of a correction officer, the sentencing for that in the Parkland school shooting, as Anjanette said, still coming up on January 4th. One way or another, he's spending the rest of his life in jail. The question left for us all is whether or not he'll get the death penalty. Of course, when that comes up, Law and Crime Daily will be sure to be here to fill you in with all the details. Thank you, everyone. On to news out of Chicago, where former Empire actor Jussie Smollett's criminal case will move forward after a judge denies his dismissal request. Smollett was indicted by a grand jury for filing a false police report after claiming he was attacked by men in ski masks outside of his apartment. He reported that the two men attacked him using racial and homophobic slurs. After investigating the two persons of interest, the police shifted their focus to see if the actor staged the attack on himself in order to promote his career. Smollett's attorney claimed that his client's rights were being violated since he had already performed his community service and forfeited a $10,000 bond after a previous deal to drop the charges. The judge denied this motion, saying that the case is now being led by a special prosecutor and that he will not be jeopardizing that arrangement. Smollett's trial is set to begin in November of 2021. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, jury selection continues in Georgia in the trial for the death of Ahmaud Arbery. Plus, Elijah McClain's family settles their lawsuit against the city of Aurora, Colorado. What the next steps are for the family who tragically lost their son in 2019. Welcome back. Nearly 2 years after his death, Elijah McClain's family announces a tentative settlement agreement with the city of Aurora, Colorado. Back in 2019, the 23-year-old was stopped by law enforcement while walking home from a convenience store. The officers were responding to a caller who said that they saw a man who looked, quote, sketchy and was wearing a ski mask. McClain, who was unarmed at the time, was wearing a ski mask because of a condition that made him feel cold. After questioning him, officers placed him in a chokehold. Then McClain told them that he couldn't breathe. He was later handcuffed and injected with ketamine by paramedics. After that, he went into cardiac arrest. McClain died in the hospital 3 days later. Attorneys for the McClain family announced on Monday that a settlement agreement had been reached. In a federal civil rights lawsuit filed by McClain's mother, the suit alleged that the city of Aurora, Colorado, the 3 police officers, 2 paramedics, and the medical director of Aurora Fire Rescue violated McClain's civil rights when he was put in a chokehold and injected with ketamine. Right now, there are no specific details about the settlement, though it is reported that McClain's parents will determine where the proceeds will be allocated. Joining us today is civil rights attorney Jeffrey Storms and Terry Austin. Terry, this is a great result for the McClain family. What do you think this means for the family and the city of Aurora?
Well, for the family, Brian, nothing is going to bring Elijah back. And it is such a horrific case. He's innocent, walking down the street, literally minding his own business, and he is basically attacked and held down, and then had this ketamine put into his system, and it was way too much, and clearly it caused his death. I think the settlement will help the family with the pain and suffering that they are going through, and clearly they are going through severe pain and suffering over his death. The amount of the settlement has not been announced, as you mentioned, and that's probably because it's got to be approved by the authorities. We may hear the amount after that authority has basically approved it. And as for the allocation, clearly we have to wait to see what's going to happen. Some of it will be allocated between the mother and the father, and so that has to be ironed out. And my thought, Brian, is that some of this money, like we've seen in other civil rights settlements, may actually go back to the city to do some programs.
Absolutely. Jeffrey, on a more macro level, do you think this settlement, like the Floyd settlement you helped obtain, is furthering a momentum to better policing, especially concerning issues of mental health?
Brian, it's definitely one part of the puzzle. And as Terry mentioned, we don't know what the amount is yet. But I think with respect to that piece of the puzzle, the settlement has to be significant enough that it makes administrators, politicians understand that they need to enforce training and they need to enforce discipline to prevent this. The other piece of the puzzle that's really critical are the criminal charges that these individuals are facing. Because the criminal piece reminds the officers that, hey, the city's not going to just buy you out of this. Your freedom, your liberty is at issue if you do not follow the law when you're performing your job.
Absolutely. Just another piece of the puzzle, as you perfectly put there, Jeff. We'll see how those pieces fall into place as this case progresses. An update now on a story we first brought you earlier in the week. The so-called January 6th committee votes to hold former Trump advisor Steve Bannon in criminal contempt. On Tuesday, the committee unanimously passed a criminal contempt report. On Thursday, the House will vote on a contempt of Congress resolution. All this is in relation to the Capitol riots that happened on January 6th. The House Select Committee in charge of investigating the January 6th attacks requested Bannon provide details about conversations he had with former President Donald Trump. They say those conversations happened leading up to the riots. Bannon refused to provide the information and didn't show up after being subpoenaed. On Monday, former President Trump filed a lawsuit to stop the January 6th committee from obtaining his records. When we come back, the latest in jury selection for the death of Ahmaud Arbery trial. How many of the hundreds called to serve will move on to the next round of questions, and what attorneys look for in potential jurors next. Welcome back. Jury selection stretches into day 3 in Georgia as the death of Ahmaud Arbery trial is underway. Before the trial can begin, 12 jurors must be seated along with 4 alternates. Jury duty notices were mailed to 1,000 people in the Brunswick, Georgia area, with 600 people called to appear starting on Monday. All this as 3 Georgia men face charges of malice murder, felony murder, and other related charges in the death of 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery. In February 2020, Arbery was shot and killed while jogging near his Brunswick, Georgia home. He was unarmed at the time of his death. Father and son duo Gregory and Travis McMichael tailed Arbery in a pickup truck before Travis McMichael shot and killed him. The pair claimed self-defense and planned to cite a Georgia citizen's arrest law that has since been repealed and replaced. The McMichaels' neighbor, William Bryan, followed along in his truck, capturing the entire incident on his cell phone. The shooting created national outrage after the cell phone video went viral in May of last year. After that, Gregory and Travis McMichael were arrested, followed by Bryan's arrest 2 weeks later. All 3 men have pled not guilty to the charges. On Wednesday, Judge Timothy Walmsley addressed potential jurors.
First the state and then the defense in this room are going to be asking you what we call general questions. Those general questions are intended to help the lawyers determine whether or not you can be a fair, unbiased, impartial juror that is honestly seeking the truth in this case. But effectively that you will be able to listen to the evidence presented in the Superior Court and be able to make a decision, reach a verdict based upon the evidence presented in the court.
Jeffrey, you represented the Floyd family and currently represent the parents of Daunte Wright. What do you think the Arbery family is going through right now during jury selection?
You know, that now that we're a little deeper into it, Brian, I think the family starts to see what a grind this process is. Initially, you know, for the first initial jurors, you're amped up, you're emotional. It's setting in that, you know, that some of these individuals may be deciding one of the most important things that's happened in your lifetime. And so you have that, but then you just see how long this takes. And, you know, as that process wears on, the things that really stand out to you are how frightening some of these potential jurors really can be and how relieved you are they're not on your jury. But at this point in time, I'm sure it's really wearing on the family, the length of the jury selection.
Yeah, what I always tell my clients and their families, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Terry, to that point, jury selection, even for us lawyers, seems to be painfully slow. Why do you think that is?
I think there are a couple of reasons. First of all, there are multiple defendants here, and each of them is represented by an attorney. And the judge has allowed all of those attorneys to have their own questions for the jury. So I think that is really adding to the time. They really should have collaborated a little more, and they should have selected a lead counsel to ask most of those questions, even though we know there's going to be separate interests, particularly as it relates to William, and he is not a McMichael, and he was different. He wasn't involved directly. He was taking the video. And I also think that, you know, there are multiple people who've already heard about this case. So it's going to be hard to find those who can be fair and impartial.
Absolutely. And also the cross-examination will be like that as well with each defendant. Thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.